Alan Kurdi's death last year shocked the world. The 3-year-old Syrian refugee died while his family was trying to cross the Mediterranean. But 1 year on, what's changed for child refugees trying to reach Europe? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. It has been 1 year since Alan Kurdi put a name and a face to the refugee crisis in Europe. Pictures of his body on a Turkish beach put a spotlight on what's been called the biggest migration of people since World War II. The images stunned the world and led to calls to stop asylum seekers making the dangerous journey. There was also increased pressure on the European Union to act, to develop a plan to resolve the refugee crisis. But not much has changed for people trying to cross the Mediterranean. The UN says more than 280,000 people have made the journey to Europe so far this year, many of them children. We'll get to our guests in a moment, but first, this report from Hoda Abdelhamid.
Splashes, squeals and laughter are what makes summer days fun. But getting into the water has a different meaning for these children. All are refugees enjoying some playtime after a swimming class. And for some, it's still a challenge. Mental health workers say it's a sign of how deep the trauma is.
Them, it was a shocking experience that cannot be explained. They've been in a dark place with people shouting, with waves and water coming in and feeling that they're gonna die. So what we try to do is reverse the traumatic experience of the sea into making the sea the fun thing that it used to be, the happy thing that it used to be.
The lessons are given by volunteer lifeguards who first arrived on the islands to rescue shipwreck victims and show up close what these children have been through. Refugees refer to the crossing of the sea in Arabic as Rihlat al-Maut, which means the journey of death. Now, among those who died in the water, many unknown who just receive a number. Others have been identified by survivors, but what's particularly shocking is the number of children among them. Like these two siblings, laid to rest under the pine trees outside a cemetery in Samos. There are now graves on several of the Greek islands refugees risk so much to reach.
We have little islands here and many.
Efila Tsudi has campaigned hard for the dead to be given appropriate ceremony according to their rituals. She has attended many funerals in the far corner of the cemetery on the island of Lesbos, like the one for Safi, a baby from Afghanistan who slipped from the arms of his mother into the water. Or 2-year-old Omar, who died when the dinghy capsized.
I saw this mother that was fainting every day, and here she couldn't stand. We were holding her all during the whole procedure. And then when it finished, she was very, very sad, but she was calm. And this makes me feel that it's horrible for the ones that have missing people and they cannot find the body.
Life jackets have become the symbol of this flight for survival. Thousands were strewn on the beaches. Sohaib remembers his relief when he discarded his, but the bright orange still haunts him.
I smell the frayedness inside the life jacket, like many people are right down in the life jacket, the prayer, the God names, to other things, like many things, like you can see in this life jacket, the people are so afraid.
The vests have now become bags sold to help those who made it across. Perhaps some solace that the dead did not perish in vain. Hoda Abdelhamid, Al Jazeera, Samos.
Nearly a third of all refugees crossing the Mediterranean are under 18 years of age. The UN says more than 80,000 children have crossed so far this year, many of them without their parents. That's the case for 9 out of 10 children who arrived in Italy this year. And the number of unaccompanied children crossing the Mediterranean is twice as many as last year. Most of them are fleeing from conflicts in Afghanistan and Syria. Let's bring in our guests. In Amman, Misty Buswell, Regional Advocacy and Communications Director with Save the Children. In Brussels, Daphne Bouteillet-Paquet, Senior Legal Officer with the European Council for Refugees and Exiles. And joining us on Skype from the Greek island of Lesbos is Jumana Abo Oxa. She's a psychologist and mental health activities manager for the humanitarian organisation Humanity Crew. Thank you so much for joining us, all three of you. Jumana Abo Oxa, this year is the deadliest on record, and certainly too for children. How is this even possible? Why is this happening?
Well, why is it happening? It's because people are trying to flee, to escape, to find a safe haven after fleeing a war, and no safe passage is provided. People are taking their chance to escape to a safe place, escape from the bombs, and try to reach safe place, and there's no possibility of arriving to the safe place unless they take the death trip, which is crossing the sea. So people are willing to take such risks in order to reach safety.
And you are there when many of them arrive. Tell us what it is that you see most of the time.
We have many arrivals. Now, at the moment, it's less than last year. However, when people arrive, they arrive in a very difficult mental state. As a psychologist working on shores and in different places in the island, we try to provide psychological first aid upon arrival and try to help the people, the adults, as well as the kids, to overcome the shock of the trip by the sea. You see boats arriving in stormy weathers. You see storms arriving almost drowning, people full of water, people screaming, kids in complete shock, and they don't say a word. And they're all looking for a safe place. People just want to live, and the only choice they find is to make the trip of crossing the Aegean Sea or the Mediterranean Sea to reach safety.
Misty Buswell, all this attention that the refugees, these awful tales have been receiving over the last year and since particularly the Syrian crisis erupted, and yet the numbers are getting worse. How are you viewing it from your point of view?
Well, I mean, I think in the year since this picture has horrified and shocked the world, you know, the conditions that drove Alan Kurdi's family and so many others to flee Syria have actually deteriorated, and we're seeing the conflict at one of the worst points yet. You know, intensification of bombing and conflict in Aleppo. You know, it's not even 2 weeks since the photo of little Omran Daknish also shocked and horrified the world, you know, pulled out of the rubble alive. But yet we can't even get the parties to the conflict to agree to a 48-hour ceasefire to allow aid to get to the people who need it most. Sieges are tightening, and, you know, people in places like Madaya haven't received any humanitarian aid since April. And they're facing conditions similar to, you know, the horrific scenes that we also saw in January. So, you know, this situation is not getting any better. It is getting worse.
I mean, you see those pictures of Alan Kurdi and the response to it, and you think, if that's not going to change it, if that's not going to force some sort of resolution, what's going to?
Well, I think that's a good question, and, you know, I think we had a lot of hope. There was an outpouring of sympathy at that moment, but I think you know, we have to say as the world that enough is enough, and we want our political leaders to stand up and say that, you know, it's time to end this conflict, and that we're not going to stand by and let the deaths of children become a daily occurrence and that be a normal thing.
And in Brussels, obviously, that's where the policies are in play to try and alleviate the system, try and get it to function a lot better. Daphne Bouteillet-Paquet, what is the response there to these numbers, these shocking and unacceptable numbers?
Well, I think as we've heard in your program, indeed the numbers are really impressive, and children arriving in Europe are an increasing proportion, actually, of people trying to reach our shores. According to UNHCR, it is above 30% of all the people arriving in Europe right now. I think we are desperate to see firm and resolute action to protect those children, and instead we see more and more of a containment policy trying to prevent people to arrive and to contain them to Greece and of course to Turkey, where they're languishing in dire humanitarian conditions. So
and are they seen as children?
we,
I mean, is there differentiation there when it comes to policy?
I think, unfortunately, these children are seen as irregular migrants more than children, and they're lacking adequate access to protection programs, indeed.
Yeah, Jumana, you were shaking your head there.
Yes, I would like to add on this. After the EU and Turkey agreement that entered into force on the 20th of March, lots of things happened, a lot of changes happened. First, the borders closed just a while before, and then the agreement between Turkey and the EU made any arrival to the shores of Greece as illegal migrants until proven that they are refugees. This change of status, that before any person coming from a country of conflict would have been considered a refugee and given, like, it depends on the nationality, but up to 6 months legal stay in the country of arrival. This thing changed, and since then the situation has deteriorated in a big way. Like, anyone needs to wait for the asylum procedures to be approved until his papers are processed, and during that time they will be situated in camps, including the unaccompanied minors that will be put in camps that not all of them are fit for children.
Okay.
And then there's also the risk of return to Turkey, which many are terrified from, because many of them have fled war, and in Turkey they will not be safe. And according to the EU and Turkey agreement, Turkey will be considered as a safe place, and that also puts more pressure on the people who arrive to Greece, that they will be returned to Turkey, and then there they will not be in a safe place.
Well, let's take a look at some of the EU's more recent policies to regulate the flow of refugees. In March, it promised to pay Turkey more than $3 billion in aid. That's the deal that Jumana was talking about, in exchange for its help preventing refugees from illegally travelling to Europe. The deal also says refugees whose asylum applications are denied are to be sent back to Turkey. In May, EU countries agreed to train the Libyan Coast Guard and Navy to prevent refugee smuggling off the Libyan coast. And the EU is working on a common European resettlement plan for refugees, but that framework has not been agreed upon. Daphne, how could this not be agreed upon? I mean, what are the problems here? Is Europe not talking with a unified voice?
No, I think European countries have very different agendas when it comes to humanitarian programs, evacuation programs, and resettlement. So that's a very big concern for us, because as it's been rightly said, I think the lack of legal and safe access to Europe explains these tragedies of people drowning in the sea, and in particular children. So the process so far has been extremely cumbersome. There's been no ambitious agreement anyways on resettlement quotas, which means that increasingly also people try to travel by very dangerous routes. And we've noticed also that although there are less arrivals coming from Turkey, the numbers of arrivals in Italy have recently increased. So I think this containment policy is also not working. It's more diverting the flow flows than actually sorting out the real problems. And once the people have reached Greece or Italy, there is an agreement to have relocation programs within the European Union, which means that each European country should take its fair share. But in reality, the implementations of such programs has been so far really disappointing. Very, very slow progress, with hardly 3,000 persons relocated from Greece to another European countries to have access to safe and dignified reception conditions.
Misty, the policies or lack of policies and the way they implement it, I mean, how are you seeing it from your end and the impact it's having, mainly on children?
Well, I think we're quite concerned about the EU-Turkey deal and that it's denying people and children their right to seek international protection and to a fair asylum hearings. And, you know, in this region, we have nearly 5 million refugees from Syria alone being generously hosted by neighboring countries. And, you know, it's very difficult when we see the Western countries and the wealthier countries not stepping up to take on their fair share of the responsibility as well. You know, in Greece, where we have programs also, we see a lot of unaccompanied children who have family in Europe who should legally be able to go and be reunified with their family in Europe, but this is not happening. You know, the implementation of these processes is very slow, you know, and whether they're actually getting fair asylum hearings and that sort of thing. So, you know, I think we need also to see a lot more of a commitment to resettlement, to humanitarian admissions. It can't just be the countries in this region who are already struggling themselves and who are stretched thin who are really bearing all of the responsibility.
Your company, the work that you do, takes you into places like Syria and Afghanistan where children are fleeing often on their own. What are some of the stories that you hear? How come their parents in many instances are happy to let the children travel on their own? What does it suggest about the situation there?
Well, I mean, I don't know that I would say any parent is happy to let their child travel on their own. We've spoken to parents who have felt that they had no other choice. And they're desperate, and that this is the only way to protect their children from an even worse fate, if you can imagine that. But, you know, as long as these conditions in these countries aren't addressed, as long as the root causes of the reasons people are fleeing, conflict and persecution, continue, then we are going to see people moving. We are going to see families feeling like they have to send their children and hope that they can come along and join them. But the harder it gets and the more that borders close, the more we will see people resorting to riskier and more dangerous methods, like smugglers, like more dangerous routes, and the more we'll see these deaths of children continue and increase.
Jumana, you touched briefly on the sort of psychological impact that children go through because of the horrendous journeys, often traveling on their own. But I mean, fleeing these war zones, they're subjected to fear. They lose loved ones, then they get on the boats. Many of them are separated from their families. I mean, what is the overall impact on them now? And what sort of adulthood are they looking forward to?
These kids and people go through a lot of things, a lot of traumas, a lot of difficult moments, and a lot of loss. Many of them lost family members, relatives, neighbors, saw a lot of death. In addition to all of that, they lost school and education. They arrive to Greece and to Europe, and they, after experiencing all of these things, and they try to wait and know what's going to happen with their future after the new agreements. The last month only, we had 1,500 arrivals to Lesbos. 1,500 people who are going to be stuck in this island and their papers are not going to be processed. Many of them already aiming to go see their families in different countries in Europe. And they will be staying in the island or in Greece in general for many months until the process is going. Many people go through depression, anxieties, lots of anger. We see a lot of suicide attempts, self-harm for minors and kids, and lack of concentration and hyperactivities for the kids. We try to provide them with a lot of support on this, also education, because education is very important, especially when these kids haven't been to school or learned anything for a really long time. I think it's not just for the kids, but also for the adults. Many of the adults arrive here. They're going to see their kids who are already unaccompanied minors, but reach their destination countries. So we deal with the adults who are in Greece, and also with their kids, for example, in Germany, who are there alone. And they call them every day. Why aren't you coming? You left me. You're not joining me. You sent me and you're not coming. While the parents are waiting for the family reunification process, which takes minimum of 6 months and can last up to a year or a year and a half. So you can see the impact, this whole impact on the family, on the kids, on the adults.
Okay, let me bring in Daphne. I mean, Daphne, I can't imagine that world leaders and those in Brussels making the rules don't understand the horrors of this lost generation, not just for children, but the long-term impact that this is likely to have if they are ever to return home, if they are to be integrated into Europe.
I think, unfortunately, we see a lack of political willingness. See countries like Hungary, see countries like Slovakia, they have deliberately refused to play their fair share in the whole process. And I think I think what we are really missing is fast-track procedures. Why? Because children tend to use the services of the smugglers instead of wasting their time in procedures that would take months, if not a year, to be sorted. You're probably aware that earlier this year, Europol has warned that more than 10,000 children have gone missing in Europe, and this is a horrifying figure in itself. So
they become targets
more
of
political
possible
commitment.
sexual predators, or
yes, their fate is unknown, but you can imagine that some of them have reached their destination, but others maybe fell prey of traffickers and exploiters of all kinds.
Misty, I mean, I can't imagine what all three of you experience on a daily basis, seeing these images, witnessing it firsthand. I mean, it must make you want to scream that very little is being done. What is your suggestion, Misty, so that the situation is improved,
Well,
and the procedures are improved as well?
Well, I mean, I do think that one of the most important things is to address the root causes of the reasons why people are fleeing. You know, the conflict in Syria and conflicts in other places are key drivers of people fleeing. And we have had the conflict in Syria for 5 years with you know, no end in sight, and we just have to continue to put the pressure on world leaders to prioritize this. In the meantime, you know, we also do need to have more focus on responsibility sharing across the international community. You know, we need these processes for people who are stuck in Greece, for children who are in detention in Greece, and, you know, unclear about what fate lies in store for them. You know, there needs
Misty,
to
I'm
be a
going to
lot
jump
more
in very
support.
quickly, running out of time. Do these children give you hope? Is there hope when you look into their eyes?
Well, you know, I think you always have to have hope. And, you know, when you see a photo like we saw yesterday, even in the worst circumstances, children in Aleppo swimming and playing in a water-filled bomb crater, I think, you know, they haven't given up hope. And we have a responsibility to do everything we can to make sure that they have protection and safety and a viable future.
Well, I admire what all three of you are doing, and thank you very much for talking to us on Inside Story. Misty Buswell with the final words there, Daphne Bouteillet-Paquet and Jumana Abo Oxa. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, You can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Jane Dutton, and the whole team here. Thank you very much for watching. Bye for now.